She was 20 and with nothing. No family left to take her in, no roof of her own, just a small brown glass tincture bottle worn warm by 4 generations of women's hands, a single thumbed page of her granny's remedy book sewn into the lining of her coat pocket, and 4 single-dollar bills she had earned shelving canned goods at the Piggly Wiggly in Newport. And with that $4, she bought a small stone spring house built directly over a cold mountain spring 2 miles up Laurel Branch Road, in the holler called Laurel Branch in Cocke County, Tennessee, in a stretch of the Smoky Mountain foothills that had not seen a tincture bottle pulled from its cold water since the autumn of 1968. The slate roof had gone soft with moss. The hand-cut oak door had warped on its iron hinges. But what nobody knew, least of all Hattie Faye Whitaker herself, was that submerged on the slate shelves below the cold flowing spring water inside that small stone house was something her granny and her granny's granny had sealed there across 97 years that would change her life forever. Before we go on, if these stories mean something to you, take a moment and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you are listening from tonight. It means more than you know to see how far these stories travel. She had seen the spring house on a hand-printed card thumbtacked to the wall of the Newport feed store in soft pencil. Stone Spring House, half-acre, branch frontage, $4 or best offer. See Mr. Wendell Ramsey at the courthouse. She had $7.20 folded in the inside pocket of her flannel workshirt, the last of 3 weeks of grocery wages. She drove the borrowed truck up to the Cocke County Courthouse on a cool Tuesday morning in late September, with the rhododendron leaves just beginning to redden along the branch, and she asked the woman at the front desk for Mr. Wendell Ramsey by name. Mr. Wendell Ramsey was 76 years old and had been the deputy clerk of Cocke County for 48 of those years. He looked up at her over the long oak counter when she said her name, looked at her over the top of his bifocals, and went very still. "Whitaker," he said slowly, the holler in the word. "From Laurel Branch. You'd be Eulalia's granddaughter then." Hattie Faye nodded once. He folded his bifocals and walked back into a small storeroom without another word. He came back 2 minutes later with a heavy iron key on a piece of plain butcher twine, the key warm from being held in a drawer for a long time. $4, he said. "We've been keeping this key 57 years. Your granny left it with my daddy back in 1968, and she told him plain, 'Hand this to whichever Whitaker girl walks back up Laurel Branch asking after the spring.' We had begun to wonder if any of you would." He laid the key in her palm. She paid him 4 soft paper dollars, signed her name, and he walked her to the door and set his old hand for 1 second on her shoulder. And he said very softly, "You go on up there before sundown, hun. The spring has been waiting on you a long while." She had grown up with the smell of mountain herbs, with the dry, sharp smell of yarrow drying upside down in bundles from her granny's kitchen rafters, with the warm, honey-sweet smell of mullein flowers infusing in olive oil on a sunny windowsill, with the cool, sharp smell of peppermint and lemon balm crushed between 2 palms, with the deep mineral cold of the spring water that came up out of the spring house and ran year-round at 52 degrees, with the soft brown earth smell of fresh-pulled bloodroot and golden seal and ginseng laid out on a clean linen sheet to dry, with the warm, bitter smell of fire cider fermenting in a stoneware crock on the back of the wood stove. She had grown up sitting on a low cedar stool at her granny's kitchen table when she was 3 and 4 years old, watching her granny's long, thin hands measure tinctures by sound, by the soft glug of brown alcohol over a packed jar of pulled root, with a slow patience that did not look like work, but like care. Her granny was Liddy Whitaker, born in 1940 in the same small frame house in Laurel Branch, where Hattie Faye would later be born, the only daughter of Asa and Cora Whitaker. She had learned the tinctures at the side of her own mother, on the same slate shelves and the same brown glass bottles her great-grandmother had set in the spring water in 1871. Liddy was small and quick, with the dark-stained fingers of a woman who pulled roots in every season, her gray hair worn in a single short braid down her back. Hattie Faye had called her Granny from the first day she could shape the sound. Hattie Faye's mother, Della, had left the holler when Hattie Faye was 2 and had not come back, and Hattie Faye's father, Cleve, had died in a logging accident on Cosby Mountain when she was 7, so the years had belonged to Granny since before Hattie Faye could ride a bicycle. She learned to identify yarrow by the smell of its bruised leaf before she could read. By 6, she could pull bloodroot in March without breaking the orange-red root. By 8, she could fold a clean square of linen over a jar of pulled golden seal and press it into a mason jar mouth without crushing the root. By 10, she could pour a tincture, 80-proof corn whiskey from a stoneware jug over a packed jar of fresh elderberry, sealed for 6 weeks in the cold of the spring house, never warmer, never the sun. By 12, she could read a tincture by the color of the liquid against a window, the deep purple black of a true elderberry, the green gold of yarrow, the amber brown of bloodroot, the pale clear gold of a good yellow root. By 15, she had pulled and tinctured and labeled 41 varieties of mountain plant in her own hand. By 18, she had finished 107 bottles, learned every one of the 23 plant medicines Granny kept on the springhouse shelves, and learned to read the cold water itself, the slow bubble pattern of a clean, active spring against the dim murk of a spring gone too warm in a dry August. Granny, on a cool Saturday morning in October in Hattie Fay's 18th year, walked out of the spring house with a small brown bottle of fresh fire cider wrapped in a clean linen cloth and laid it in Hattie Fay's hands at the threshold and said, "You are a granny woman now, child. The plants know you. The water knows you. The bottles know you." And then she said, in her quiet way, "And there is one thing I have not yet shown you, because the spring herself had to choose the morning. Come down with me to the water." But before Hattie Fay or Liddy, there had been Matilda. Mathilde Whitaker had come from a small mountain village in the Cévennes in southern France in the autumn of 1869, 21 years old, with her young husband Augustin Whitaker on a ship out of Le Havre. She had carried in her wooden trunk a single small brown glass tincture bottle that had belonged to her grandmother, a thumbed handwritten remedy book of mountain plant medicine going back 4 generations on the slopes of the Lozère, packets of dried mountain herb wrapped in linen, and the knowledge of plant medicine the women of her village had been keeping for 200 years before any Whitaker man had set foot in America. The Whitakers had come up out of the New Orleans docks and worked their way north along the rivers and rails for 18 months, and they had stopped at a small Tennessee mountain holler called Laurel Branch because the spring there ran clear and cold at 52 degrees year-round out of a cleft in a moss-covered limestone bluff, and Mathilde had stood at the spring for a long time on a cool October afternoon in 1870, and she had told Augustin, in the careful, slow English she was still learning, "This is the place. We will not go further." She had been 22. She had no money to speak of, and no soil yet broken, and no one in the holler who believed a young Frenchwoman knew anything about plant medicine that the mountain people did not already know. But Matilda had set her hand on the moss of the limestone bluff, and she had begun. She and Augustin built a small frame house up the slope from the spring in the spring of 1871, and that same summer Matilda built, with her own hands and Augustin's, a small stone spring house directly over the cleft where the spring came up, 10 feet by 12, walls of cut local fieldstone 2 feet thick, a slate roof set in oak rafters, an oak door on iron hinges, and inside 3 long slate shelves built into the stone walls so that the surface of the shelves sat just 2 inches below the surface of the cold-flowing spring water that came up through the floor, ran across the slate, and out through a small stone channel under the back wall to the branch beyond. She set her first bottles on the slate shelves in October of 1871. She kept the spring house for 41 years. She added a bottle a month and sometimes 3, and she labeled each one in her careful hand on a small slip of waxed cotton paper tied to the neck of the bottle with linen string. And the women of Laurel Branch, and of 3 hollers around it, began to walk up the road to her door with the small troubles a country doctor could not yet reach, a child's croup and an old man's heart, and a young woman's hard birth and the slow rheumatism of the mountain winters, and Mathilde gave them tinctures and vinegars and oil extracts, and the small honey-sweet remedies the French Cévennes had kept for 200 years. And the spring house at Laurel Branch ran without a single idle season for 97 years, through Matilda and her daughter Adele, and her granddaughter Eulalia and Eulalia's daughter Liddy, until the autumn of 1968, when Liddy was 28 and her own mother Eulalia had just gone. And Liddy walked down the slope from the house on a cool October morning and set a single brown glass bottle of fresh elderberry tincture on the slate shelf and walked back up to the house and did not return to the spring house for 57 years. Granny had 3 rules for the water. The first was this: the water knows. You do not preserve the medicine, child. The cold flowing water preserves the medicine. You only carry the plant to the water, and the water does the rest. If a tincture is going wrong on you, it is the water you have failed, not the plant. Mind the water first. The second was this: the plant gives once and only once in the right hour. A bloodroot pulled in March is medicine. A bloodroot pulled in June is poison. Yarrow at full flower is medicine. Yarrow gone to seed is hay. The plant tells you when to take it. Listen to the plant, Han, and never reach for what you want from a season that is already past. The third was this: the remedy is not the bottle. The remedy is the hand. A granny woman can pour a perfect tincture from the cleanest plant in the cleanest jar in the coldest water, and if her hand is not steady and her heart is not quiet, the tincture will not heal what it is meant to heal. The hand is the medicine. Mind that above the other 2. Granny died in November of 2023 on a cold, rainy afternoon, in her chair beside the wood stove in the small frame house on Laurel Branch, with the open-thumbed remedy book in her lap and a fresh bundle of dried yarrow on the side table beside her. The doctor said it was her heart. Hattie Fay was 19. She did not cry. She came home from her shift at the Piggly Wiggly and found Granny in the chair, and she sat down on the floor beside the chair and laid her cheek against Granny's cool hand, and she stayed there until the funeral home came. She finished labeling the last fresh bottle of yarrow tincture herself that night in her own careful young hand, and only when the bottle was sealed did she sit down beside the cold wood stove and finally let herself cry. The small house on Laurel Branch belonged to the bank because Granny had taken a small second mortgage on it during her last sickness, and within 4 months of Granny's funeral, the bank had come and asked Hattie Fay to be out by the 1st of October. She had left with the small brown glass tincture bottle Granny had pressed into her hand on her last clear afternoon, a single thumbed page torn carefully from Granny's remedy book sewn into the lining of her coat pocket, a small canvas bag of her clothes, and the photograph of 3 women standing in the doorway of the spring house in 1948. If these stories are reaching you tonight, take a second to subscribe. It truly does help us keep making them. And tell us in the comments, was there ever a small remedy, a tea, a poultice, a hand on a fevered brow that you carry with you from a woman who is no longer here? The 2-mile walk up Laurel Branch Road from where the borrowed truck would no longer climb was steeper than she remembered. The rhododendron and the laurel arched over the road in deep, dark green tunnels. The branch came down clear and cold over rounded brown stones on the right. The first chestnut leaves were going pale yellow in the canopy. She found the foundation of the old frame house first, 4 courses of fieldstone in a square of new grass, and just beyond it, down a worn footpath into the deep shaded laurel hell set against the foot of a moss-covered limestone bluff, the small stone spring house. Cut gray fieldstone walls patched green and silver with moss and lichen, a slate roof gone soft with cushions of moss, an oak door on iron strap hinges, warped but whole. And from under the back wall of the spring house, in a small stone channel running out into Laurel Branch, the clear silver shimmer of cold water, leaving the spring house exactly as it had left for 97 autumns. She did not cry. She brushed away a fall of yellow chestnut leaves from the threshold with her boot, fitted the heavy iron key into the rusted iron lock, worked the key gently for the better part of a minute until the wards remembered how to turn, and then the bolt slid back with a small wet sound, and the oak door eased open. The cold breath of the spring house came out of the dim interior and across her face, 52 degrees and damp and smelling of cold mountain stone and water and the faint sweet ghost of mountain herb. She stood in the doorway a long minute. Then she lit her granny's small oil lantern and she stepped inside. The spring house was 10 feet by 12 and tall enough for her to stand. The floor was made of fitted flagstones, with the cold, clear, flowing spring water visible between every joint, the spring itself bubbling up gently from the cleft in the limestone bluff at the back of the house. 3 long slate shelves ran along the side walls and the back wall, built into the stone, the surfaces of the shelves sitting 2 inches below the surface of the cold flowing water, the water running across them in a slow, steady silver sheet and out through the small stone channel under the back wall. On the slate shelves, submerged in the cold flowing water, stood the bottles. Dozens of small brown glass tincture bottles, some pint stoneware crocks, a few clear glass apothecary jars with ground stoppers, each one with a small slip of waxed cotton paper tied to its neck with linen string. The lantern light caught the wet glass and threw it back as 100 small, warm flames against the cold, flowing silver of the water. The dry, papery rustle of cotton labels swaying in the water, the slow, steady sound of the spring itself coming up out of the limestone. She walked slowly along the side shelf, the lantern held up, and she read the labels. Elderberry tincture, 1873. Bloodroot, 1874. Yarrow, 1875. Fire cider, 1877. Golden seal, 1880. Mullein, 1882. Lobelia, 1885. Black cohosh, 1890. Cramp bark, pleurisy root, boneset, sourwood honey and herb. Matilda's hand on the oldest labels in careful French penmanship, Adele's hand after, Eulalia's hand in the middle years, Liddy's hand at the end. The label on the very last bottle on the back wall shelf, in Liddy's careful hand. Elderberry, October 1968, the last bottle Granny had set in the spring house before she had walked away. On the back wall, on the middle shelf, above the running water, sat a small flat tin box with a hinged lid and a small canvas sack dry above the waterline. Hattie Fay lifted the tin first. Inside was the original remedy book, thick, sewn together with linen thread, the cover of soft-tanned cowhide, the pages of cotton paper hand-cut and hand-ruled, and on every page, in the careful hands of 5 generations of women, was the whole apothecary of the holler. The plant, the hour of pulling, the cleaning, the proof of the spirit or the strength of the vinegar, the ratio, the weeks in the cold water, the dose, the complaint it was meant for, the name of the woman it had been made for. Mrs. Pettigrew's croup tincture, December 1874. Mr. Calderwood's heart drops, March 1890. Sarah Bishop's birth tea, August 1907, page after page after page, the whole apothecary of 3 hollers in one book. Hattie Fay laid the book down and lifted the canvas sack. It was heavier than it looked. Inside were 11 small French gold pieces, 20-franc Napoleon coins from the 1840s and 50s, the gold Matilda had carried out of the Cevennes in the lining of her own coat. Folded into the back of the remedy book, sealed with a drop of pine pitch gone hard as amber, was a single letter, the wax still whole, addressed in long, careful old penmanship in a French-tinged hand. To whoever finds this spring. From Matilda Whitaker, Granny Woman, Laurel Branch, 1872. She broke the seal with her thumb and read the letter aloud to the spring house because there was no one else to read it to. To whoever finds this spring. If you are reading this, you have walked back up Laurel Branch with a key in your hand, and you have known to open the oak door and to read the labels and to lift the tin from above the waterline. And you are a Whitaker woman, and the spring has called you home. My name is Mathilde Whitaker. I was born Mathilde Béraud in the village of Florac, in the Cevennes mountains of southern France, in the year 1848, the youngest of 3 sisters, and the only one my grandmother taught the medicine of the mountain plants, because I was the only one who would sit still and listen. I came across the ocean with my husband Augustin in the autumn of 1869, and we walked up Laurel Branch in October of 1870, and I stood at this spring, and I knew, the way a woman knows a thing once and keeps it for 50 years, that this water was the same 52 degrees as the water that came up out of the limestone behind my grandmother's house in Florac. And I built this spring house over it with my own 2 hands and Augustin's the next summer, because cold flowing water is the only thing on this earth that will keep a tincture honest for 100 years, and a tincture that is not honest is a tincture that does not heal. The bottles in this spring house are not money, daughter. They are better than money. They are the medicine of 2 mountain ranges and 4 generations of women, and many of them, by the time you find them, will be the only bottles of their kind left alive on this earth. The gold in the sack is the gold I carried out of France in the lining of my coat, and I have not spent it, and I trust you will not spend it for any reason other than to mend this slate roof, or replace this oak door, because the spring herself is the inheritance, not the gold. Do not move the bottles. Do not drain the spring. Do not let the water stop running. The water is the medicine. We are only the hands that carry the plant to the water. With my whole hand and my whole heart, Matilda Whitaker, Granny Woman, Laurel Branch, Cock County, Tennessee, the 14th of October, 1872. Hattie Fay laid the letter flat on the dry middle shelf. She set her open palm across it. She did not cry. She closed her eyes and breathed in the cold mountain stone and water, and the faint sweet ghost of every herb sealed in the bottles around her, and the tight thing that had lived in her chest since the rainy November afternoon she had walked into Granny's kitchen, loosened. The name of the loosening was home. She drove the gold pieces down to a careful coin dealer in Knoxville the following week, a man named Mr. Beaumont Lecoq, who valued the 11 Napoleon 20-franc coins at $31,200. She sold 4 of them. She put $12,000 in a savings account at the Cock County Bank, and she walked back up Laurel Branch with a sack of new slate shingles for the roof, a sheet of new oak for the door, 2 coils of new linen string, a small case of new brown glass tincture bottles, and a small new bottle of corn whiskey from a careful neighbor at Carson Mountain for the autumn tinctures. She did not move the old bottles. The old bottles stayed where Matilda and Adele and Eulalia and Liddy had set them, on the slate shelves below the cold flowing water. But she did, that first October, walk down to the old men and women of Laurel Branch and the 3 hollers around it, and she carried a single small brown bottle to each of them. Mrs. Ruth Ann Gabbard, 91, who'd been a child when Eulalia made her first croup tincture. Mr. Hoyt Pettigrew, 88, whose grandfather had been Matilda's first customer. Mrs. Lila Bishop, 83, whose great-great-grandmother's birth tea was still on the spring-house shelf in a bottle dated 1907. Each one took the small bottle in their old hands and looked at it for a long time. Each one said the same thing in some form. We had begun to wonder if any of you would come back. And in the spring, an older woman drove up the road from the Foxfire Museum in Mountain City, who had been searching for 30 years for surviving examples of late 19th century Sevens Appalachian plant medicine, and she stood in the open door of the spring house in May with her hand against her mouth, looking at the rows of brown glass under the cold flowing water, and she said only, "Please, hon, please show me." That is the thing about the granny woman work our grandmothers teach us. The slow kind, the kind we learn at a kitchen table by the soft glug of brown alcohol over a packed jar when we are 3 years old. It is not really about the bottle. The bottle is the wage. The water is the trade. The trade is the cold flowing spring that holds a tincture honest for 100 years, and the plant pulled in the right hour and not the wrong one, and the steady hand and the quiet heart that carry the plant to the water. The trade is the women who walk up the road in their old age and weep at a small brown bottle and say, "We had begun to wonder if any of you would come back." The trade is, above all, the truth Matilda wrote in her letter on the 14th of October, 1872. The spring is the inheritance. We are only the hands that carry the plant to the water. Hattie Fay Whitaker was 20 years old and with nothing. She had $4 to her name, and she spent them on a small stone spring house built directly over a cold mountain spring, 2 miles up Laurel Branch Road, in Laurel Branch in Cock County, Tennessee. It was the best $4 she ever spent. If this story has kept you company tonight, thank you for sitting up with us. Sleep well, breathe easy, and see you in the last warm light of the day.